Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, for 30 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, on September 7th, 8th, and 9th, the Susquehanna River and some of its tributaries, swollen by the remnants of Tropical Storm Lee, overflowed their banks. This happened shortly after northeastern Pennsylvania was soaked by Hurricane Irene, which brought local rivers and creeks to their banks. So when Tropical Storm Lee moved in over my district, the results were catastrophic. In some communities, the flood waters came quickly. Creeks raged out of control. Homes were swept off their foundations and toppled into muddy pits. Roads were washed away. In other communities, the water rose more slowly, but it did no less damage. I was there in the town of Duryea, Pennsylvania, when the Lackawanna River topped the small levee and began flooding homes. It was like watching someone fill an aquarium. Only this was much, much more destructive. I spent many days in September traveling across my district to see firsthand the devastation caused by this flooding. It's hard to describe exactly what it looks like. Think of everything you have on the first floor of your home. Your couch, reclining chairs, your refrigerator, your stove, your dishwasher, your television. Maybe you have a bedroom on the first floor, your mattress, your dresser. Then think of everything you have in your basement, a washer, a dryer, your furnace, your hot water heater, your winter clothing. Now imagine all of that on the sidewalk, ready for a dumpster because it is soaked with river water. It's dirty with river mud. And it's contaminated by whatever else flowed into the river when the water rose. But go beyond these possessions. Think of the photographs on your walls and on your end tables. Think of your children's toys in the basement. Think of the mementos, family treasures handed down to you by your parents and your grandparents. Now imagine all of that on the sidewalk too. But it's not just your house. It's your neighbor's house next door and the house across the street and all of those houses up and down your street. Imagine entire neighborhoods, block after block of destruction. And imagine the smell of it. Wet fabric, spoiled food, spilled fuel oil, raw sewage, and mud. Mud 2 feet deep in basements and covering lawns and filling swimming pools. That is what I experienced. That is what my constituents experienced. It's what they're continuing to cope with as they try to rebuild. I will never forget standing in a ruined living room with a woman in West Nanticoke. Most of her belongings were piled on the street in front of her home. She wept as she told me that both her husband and her son died in the last 6 months. During this flooding, she lost almost everything she owned. Think about that. She lost her husband. She lost her son. She lost most of her belongings. She lost her home, all in 6 months. The loss is just incredible. I've seen children console their parents, saying, "Mommy, don't cry." And Shikshini, a mother, pointed to a leather jacket and remembered the first time her daughter wore it. She broke down as she told me she hoped her grandchild would wear it someday. It too was ruined and had to be thrown away. An old black and white photograph of a woman sat on a pile of belongings in front of a home in West Pittston. The surface of the photo was covered in muddy streaks, as if the owner tried to save it. But she couldn't save it from the mud. It had to be thrown away. Another memory lost. In Bloomsburg, a family stayed in their home to try to move their possessions to an upper floor. But Fishing Creek rose too quickly. The house next to theirs was knocked from its foundation. Water started gushing through their front windows as they called for help. They had to be saved by a helicopter. The woman there told me that she can never live in that home again. A woman near Orangeville cried as she told me her neighbor's house, carried by the same raging creek, smashed into hers, demolishing a lifetime of memories. An elderly man in Duryea broke down as he told me how much time and money he put into making his house a home for his family, only to see it all ruined by high water. In Exeter, borough officials made a gut-wrenching decision. They hauled in 200 truckloads of dirt and created a makeshift dike right down the middle of a residential street. Several dozen homes were saved, but dozens more were ruined. Scenes like this were repeated hundreds, thousands of times in town after town in northeastern Pennsylvania. And all of these damaged homes and businesses if all of these homes and businesses were in one city, it would make the evening news every day. But the damage sustained by my constituents is spread out over miles of the Susquehanna River Basin. The scope of this damage goes far beyond what the local and state governments can fix on their own. The federal government must step in. Mr. Speaker, I ask, what are we going to do to make these people's lives whole again? Officials from the Federal Emergency Management Agency have told my constituents what they will receive for their losses. It's about what it costs for an American family to buy a decent car nowadays. That's for all of their furniture. That's for all of their clothes, for all of their treasured belongings. For many of my constituents, it's not nearly enough. I remember standing in front of one family's home which had river water flowing more than a foot deep up on its second floor. Most of this family's possessions were piled onto the sidewalk. Some were dripping wet. The mother looked at her children's toys ruined by the flood. She pointed to one little toy and said, "How can the government put a price on that? My son played with that. Those are memories. How can you put a price on that?" She's right. We cannot put a price tag on memories, but the federal government can and should do more for our neighbors. I know that in these budget-conscious times, we worry about offsets to increases in any other spending. I also know we can find some duplicative program, some excessive spending, some additional funding somewhere in the vast federal budget and provide more help for flood victims. The United States of America is one of the most generous, compassionate countries when it comes to providing global aid. This government has no problem sending money overseas to build roads and bridges and hospitals and schools in foreign countries. When disaster strikes anywhere in the world, the United States is the first country to help rebuild. But now that a disaster occurred right here in our own backyard, we need to start rebuilding here first. Let's help Americans first. We must restore American lives, save American businesses, and protect American jobs. At a time when we're so focused on creating jobs and helping businesses, the United States Small Business Administration will offer disaster recovery loans at 6%. That's right, 6%. And that rate is if a business owners can get credit elsewhere. That is not acceptable. I've talked to dozens of business owners in Luzerne and Columbia counties who've lost everything, their shops, their inventories, their fixtures, their equipment. A small business owner in Jenkins Township said he's not sure he can recover after suffering more than $7 million in flood losses. He doesn't know if he's going to rebuild and reopen, or maybe close his doors forever. I don't know any business owner in my district who thinks a 6% government disaster recovery loan will help them get back on their feet. My district has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state, and a rate higher than the national average. The people of the 11th District in northeastern Pennsylvania need their jobs. We can't afford for these businesses to close. For the SBA to offer a ridiculously high interest rate in the name of disaster relief to these business owners is downright insulting. What rate do we charge foreign countries when we rebuild their infrastructure? The answer is 0. We don't charge foreign countries any interest. The money they receive from the United States is a giveaway. This government gave $215 million interest-free dollars for flood relief to Pakistan, a country that harbored Osama bin Laden. And it's charging American homeowners and American business owners interest rates on loans they're using to rebuild. That's wrong. We must take a serious look at how the interest rate for SBA disaster recovery loans are calculated. That's why I introduced the Disaster Loan Fairness Act of 2011, H.R. 3042. This bill would set the interest rate for all recovery loans, home disaster loans, business physical disaster loans, and economic injury disaster loans at 1% for the life of the loan up to 30 years. The rate would be effective for presidentially declared major